Welcome! I'm Johan and Lincoln.
And I'm Lincoln Murphy, and this is Impact Weekly. We're here to help you make your customers successful. Each week, we answer your most pressing customer success management questions by relying on our years of experience with companies around the world.
Let's get this going. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's Impact Weekly. Another week and a brand new question coming in. And I think it's a really interesting one. It came up in one of our trainings recently, and I think it's something that's not very often talked about. So let's jump in. This is the question. On paper, it looks like my customer success managers should be under capacity, but they are telling me that they are burned out. What am I missing here, and how do I handle this?
Okay, I remember this.
Burned out.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting one because I remember this came up in our head of customer success training, our program specifically about scaling. And we were talking about capacity planning, and this was where the work had been basically done to figure out how much capacity our CSMs have. And really what that means is how many person hours it takes to ensure that our customers are achieving their appropriate experience as they achieve their goal. And it looked good on paper, or it looked good on the spreadsheet. And yet the CSMs were telling this head of customer success that they were burned out. And it was just it was an interesting discussion. And this is going to be a good topic. And it turns out we have a lot to say about this. Everything we're going to talk about here is a mix of CSM and head of customer success level stuff. So some of this is going to apply to CSM. Some of this is going to apply only to heads of customer success. I think we need to set the stage for some things. I think let's start with, what does Google define burnout as?
Yeah, let's start there. What is it? What do they say? I think everybody is familiar with it, but anyways, what's the official
so if the first thing that comes up on Google, and I like this one, is burnout is ongoing emotional exhaustion, psychological distance or negativity, and feelings of inefficacy. So just not being able to actually do anything. I think it's a good definition. I think it fits. To me, the thing that we really have to pay attention to there is the ongoing aspect of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? We were talking about this before we got started, the ongoing versus temporary.
Right.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think that's, of course, I think we should definitely try to break this down a little bit. And can be times when we are exhausted as a customer success team. Maybe we signed up a record amount of customers the previous months, and there's a lot of onboardings, or we released a new feature, or we did a big thing with the product, or something major has happened and it's caused a peak in workload basically. And I think that can be one type of exhaustion, but the ongoing part, as you say here, Lincoln, is of course the thing that really can turn ugly for us and burn us out.
Yeah, I think to me, and I don't know that there is you say this has to happen for 3 quarters in a row, and before we say this is ongoing. I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule around that, but I would say that if you have a busy time of year, let's say we're recording this in December, right, of 2023. So end of the year, right? There's just a lot going on there. If this is your busy time of year, then you can accept that, okay, the burnout that I'm hearing about right now is temporary, because in January, in the first quarter, things will slow back down. Now, if in the first quarter, I'm still hearing the same thing, then I'm going to figure out probably pretty quickly that this is not just a temporary thing. As head of customer success, what you need to do is try to get ahead of this a little bit though, right? If you have a busy time of year that's going to be coming up, make sure you're managing expectations around that. Maybe give people some breaks before we head into the busy time. Let them know that this is going to happen. Let them know that it is temporary. And make sure you reward them for
Yeah.
stepping up at a time when they might have to do a little bit more work. At that point, yeah, they're going to be exhausted. They might feel temporarily burned out, but they're not this sort of deep emotional
Yeah.
exhaustion. Again, that moves into just that psychological distance or
Okay.
negativity that the definition has. We obviously
Yeah.
don't want
But
that, but
and that makes all the difference, right? I'm a keen runner. If I
yeah,
go out for a marathon, it's long, but I know there's an end to it, right? If I just went out running without any end,
I
that
mean,
would be really hard, psychologically and of course physically as well. And I think
I
we
love
can
that.
bear a lot, but if we don't know it's temporary, if we don't know like we have a goal in mind and a reward, I think that's the problem here.
Yeah, in your case, the reward is that you get to stop running. That's
Exactly.
that's about the only
I
thing
remove
I
the
can see
pain.
being a good. Yeah, I ran around the block once. That was enough for me. But that's a great analogy. I really like that. And it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I think we can all relate to something in our lives where, yeah, if we got through this stressful time because we knew that that there was an end to it. But those
Yes.
times where we don't know that this is ever going to end, that's when it really starts to weigh on you. And
Yes.
I think I will also say in customer success, and yes, this is a rash generalization, but I think it still holds true all this time into this profession. A lot of people that move into customer success do so because they just have a characteristic of themselves is that they care.
Yeah.
They have empathy and all that, and that's what we want. And the problem with that is it allows them to maybe take on a little bit m- more in terms of an investment in their customer's outcome. They're just going to care about more parts of the role
Yeah.
that are beyond just what they're tasked with or what their tasks are.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so that's another thing to kind of keep in mind there. But I think we really just need
Yeah.
to level set on this.
Yeah.
Real ongoing burnout
Yeah.
is not just part of the job as a CSM.
No, definitely.
That is not how it has to be.
And
I want to lay that out there.
yeah, I think it's also one of the reasons we wanted to bring this up, that in some cases this is a little bit taboo to talk about. It depends, of course, a lot about the culture at the company and even country you're working and so on. But I think a lot of times, if you have high turnover in your team, it might be that they've been burned out. Maybe they haven't told you, you haven't seen the signs. We're going to talk about those shortly. But I think it's quite rare that someone actually, in this example, I think that someone mentioned that they are feeling burnout, but I think we'll get to that. But I think that's unusual. And I think that's a very important part of this problem as well. We'll get to that soon.
No, but it was so fascinating when we were having this discussion in the training because this head of customer success was like, I'm essentially looking at
Yeah.
the data says they should be under capacity,
Yeah. Yeah.
but they're telling me they're burned out. And this head of customer success, through no fault of their own, they were looking at the data and almost believing that more than they were believing the CSMs.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, we had a little bit of back and forth and they came to, as they were saying these things out loud, probably for the first time to anybody, because being a head of customer success, sometimes it's lonely.
Yes.
You don't actually get to ever talk these things out. It's one of the great things about what we do in Impact Academy, if I do say so myself. We get to talk about this stuff. It's a safe space. And as they were saying this out loud, they said, oh my gosh, they're telling me they're burned out. That is a signal. It's about the most direct signal I can get.
Yeah.
And I'm ignoring it because I was just looking at the data. Yes, it was interesting. And by the way, in this example that this head of customer success was bringing up, it turns out this company sells a product that helps mental health care. It turns out the CSMs are dealing with some pretty heavy topics. They're not working with the end clients, but just working with the practices. There's enough of an overhead, an emotional and mental overhead of dealing with this heavy topic that it was like, wow, functionally and technically what it takes to work with the customer, it really requires this many person hours. And I can have my CSMs spend 75% of their time working in customer facing activities. But it turns out because of what we do, we actually need to figure out maybe that our CSMs need to spend less than 75% of their available time working on customer facing activities. Now, maybe we go 65 or even 50% of their time, because the overhead of working with this stuff was so much. It's very interesting. And again, it was just interesting to see this sort of all unfold in real time as this person was saying these things out loud, again, probably for the very first time. And I think that's why you always want to find somebody or find a group of people that you trust that you can talk about these things with, because
And
they're
the
often
response from the other heads of customer success in the training were they were nodding heads. I think people really they really lean into this, and they really had the same situation or been through the same situation. So I think it's a lot more common, and I think it's maybe not as I don't think we talk about it enough. Basically.
Yeah. And like you said, some of that is cultural, right? You may not, just for whether it's your business culture, whether it's something cultural in the region in which you operate, whatever, you may not have people just straight up telling you that they are burned out. So we'll talk about some of the signs there, but there's also there's another aspect of culture.
Yeah.
And that's generational differences.
Yes.
We probably work with multi or intergenerational teams.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it being taboo to talk about burnout. There's another taboo topic here, which is bringing up, what about those people those kids today that just don't want to work?
Right.
You hear that a lot.
Yeah.
And I think
from different generations, right?
Most likely from different generations.
Yeah.
And the reality is, in a lot of cases, it's not that people don't want to work. It's that they don't want to work in oppressive, negative, toxic environments. And so that's usually it. And there's this great book called Generations, The Real Differences Between Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, Boomers, and Silence, and what they mean for America's future. This book is probably something that works across, it's America-based.
More nations, I would say.
Yeah, but I think it probably works. By Gene Twenge, if I'm saying that right. It's a great book. Really explains the differences between the generations. And certainly there's a lot of detail on the generations that are probably present currently on your team. And
probably a good read also to better understand your customers.
Absolutely.
If you work with customers
and your family
generations and your family, right? People in general. Yes.
Yeah. Just basically, if you exist in society, you might want to read this book. It was certainly eye-opening, but the book, but also just this idea that there are lots of different perspectives, and some of that might cause some people to not just explicitly say, I'm burned out. Right. So you have to then look for the signs.
Yes.
So what are some of the signs of burned out CSMs?
Yeah. I think this goes across all teams, but some of these are more specific, and we'll get into the more specific later on. But in general, of course, a lot of leave, if it's sick leave, real sick leave, or if it's just absence, a lot of absence from work, paid leave or whatever. I think that's typically a sign.
Yeah, and we were talking before we started. I know, look, again, depends on where you are, and you may need to get HR involved, but so I use your, whatever the governance is that run, you have to work within. But the reality is, if you have people that are taking a lot of leave, especially in a short time frame, and maybe they haven't normally done that, it's a little bit out of whatever character we thought they had, there might be something going on there. But I remember working with a company where one of their CSMs was always visibly sick on the Zoom calls and just always had like sinus problems. And he said it's allergies or whatever. But the reality is, this was somebody for whom stress manifested physically.
Wow. Yeah.
And this person ended up quitting. And when they quit, they cited the fact that they were extremely burned out and had been for months. And again, you can't just, and you probably shouldn't, even if you can legally, but you may not want to just say, hey, you seem sick a lot. Is everything okay? You just have to be careful about how you handle that. And it's going to differ from one jurisdiction to another. But to me, that might be a reason to intervene and just check up on them without calling attention to this thing that they might even be embarrassed about or feel bad about or whatever. Or again, maybe somehow legally protected in your jurisdiction. But
Yeah.
it may be a reason that you want to check in and just go look at their workload, go look at their calendar, all that stuff,
Absolutely.
and see. So real sickness,
Yes.
unfortunately, is a legitimate thing, but also people taking whatever their PTO is, their paid time off and sick leave and stuff, again, in a short time frame.
Yeah.
Where additional context clues would indicate that maybe
Mhm.
something is going on there, right?
Yeah.
So again, we want to be careful with people's privacy
Right.
and stuff like that, but you can look at that and go, something's
Yes.
off here, right?
Yeah. And I think we talk about signs or signals here. And I think that's when you notice, and then instead of just maybe that's nothing, and then I think this is where you should pick it up and try to, understand what's going on. I think
Exactly.
this is a key thing here. Otherwise, it's easy to not see. You have a gut feel that something is off, but then you keep at it, and you want to achieve, and you want to run all the things done. But I think these signs are really time to pause or stop and check in, basically, if you're the manager here.
For sure. And I think what we just talked about are like maybe almost the end game, but there's going to be things leading up to that. Like they just start missing things. They're not communicating, or they're communicating very tersely. Maybe they used to really sort of engage, and now their responses are minimal and terse. Maybe they even stop.
I think
that's absolutely indifference, just an overall lack of participation, which you'll start to see when they turn their camera off on Zoom calls.
Right.
You will
Also a
see
good sign or bad sign.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a good sign that something's wrong.
Yeah.
Like you'll see blocks of time on their calendar that are not specified. They're maybe blocking off a couple hours in the morning, and maybe it shows that they're online, but remote workers, this can really happen, but people can check out sitting in a cubicle in the office.
Yeah.
And so just all sorts of those things that
Yeah.
you start to add up. And so if you're looking for those things early, you can intervene early before
Definitely
things get really bad.
I think especially like usually a commit, engaged, and not burned out customer success manager usually brings a lot of initiatives and brings up potential problems, issues. And I think that's, even if it's as a manager, maybe that's a little bit of a headache because you have to fix things, so you have to do things. I think that's a really good sign of engagement.
Yes.
And if you notice someone has been doing that and then stops doing that, I think that's also like a sign to say something's, this, my CSM here, he or she were always bringing in suggestions to fixes to the product or improvements or issues or ideas. And then all of a sudden that's going away. That could be a sign as well. To look.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say any big changes to how somebody has been operating just in general, but especially if it's a really positive change, maybe that's okay. But if things start to change in a way that with lack of engagement, lack of participation, whatever that looks like, that's something to pay attention to. And I know that as your teams grow, it's harder for you to keep that level of engagement with them, but that's also your job. And you got to figure out ways of doing that. There's no excuses, right? At the end of the day, you're in charge. If your CSMs are burned out and you don't notice, that's on you. Look for these things early, intervene early, put on your coaching hat. This is one of we say heads of customer success are leaders, managers, and coaches. Coaching is a big deal here, but you also need to make sure that you're creating an environment for your CSMs to thrive and you're not setting them up for failure.
Yeah.
And burnout. And that's what our sort of the next thing we need to talk about is, why does this happen?
Right.
So we've identified some of the signs, but what are the things that could actually cause that? So once you even figure out, okay, this is happening, what do I need to be looking for here? Figure out what's going on. Why is this happening?
Yeah, what's going on? And why is this maybe, I think there's several things going on within customer success that are maybe, it's extra risk for burnout, if you like. And I think we should talk about those as well. And one thing I think is that I think you said it great there. Like the people that get into customer success management, they care about they're passionate about the company, the product, and the customers, and they care about the customers genuinely. And I think that's also, so they could come in with, they want to do a lot, and and they hate to not be there for the customer, and they hate to not fulfill or meet expectations and so on. There's a lot going on there. But maybe one thing related to that as well, that I think working with customers and driving initiatives, there's a lot of open loops. It's like in sales, you win a deal, or you lose a deal basically, and then you move on. In customer success, it's more you have these ongoing relationships. They can stretch over time, and you're almost there, and you're working and working, but you're not really getting to the the finish
Right.
line of things. You can do a lot of things to improve this, but there's a risk to have a lot of things going on without, again, back to this, like closing the loop, or getting across the finish line.
Yeah. And I think, look, this is where you have to be deliberate as a head of customer success in finding the right people for the right roles. If you have somebody, we'll talk about this more in a minute, but I think this is as good a time as any. If you have someone who is, let's say, more project focused, more transactional, maybe there's somebody that has spent time in support. They are just really good at dealing with one thing at a time. They're not really into longer term relationships with customers.
Right.
That's not where they thrive. This would be somebody that would be great maybe as an onboarding specialist. If you take that person who would be great working the very specific life cycle stage of onboarding, which really runs through these very specific technical, administrative, and functional steps, and then it has a very specific end, and they can just work with customers like that. And you put that person in a customer success management role where they're working with your higher touch or your sync customer segment, where they're going to have to spend a lot of time doing one-on-one meetings with the customers, and it's going to go across like you said, lots of time, maybe several years, and the customers are going to be working on different projects. Some of those projects are going to be completed, sometimes they're not. They have different goals, they're stacking goals. That person is probably going to be miserable. That person is not going to thrive in that role. But you were not deliberate, and you said, "Oh, you have customer success experience. Let me put you here. I need a CSM." And now you've put them in a place where they're not going to thrive. In fact, they would have been perfect in onboarding. We also see a problem here with career pathing in customer success management, where we will take somebody. Let's say we bring that person in and we put them in onboarding, and they do great. They do awesome in onboarding. And so we promote them to be a CSM, and we just promoted them into a role that they're going to fail. Yeah. They're going to get burned out. They're going to fail. Like, it doesn't make any sense. This is, by the way, that's not a customer success thing. That in other parts of the company as well, we promote people into roles that they're not a fit for, because we're not taking into consideration these things, and we have to have a career path though. So there we go. So we're putting the wrong people in the wrong place, in the wrong role.
Yeah.
And that's those open loops. That's a great example of, if that's not how you thrive, if you are not okay with open loops, you are going to be miserable. Right. And I don't know that there's really a middle ground there. If you need to have those loops closed and they're not, that's going to be that's a recipe for burnout. It's a recipe for failure.
Yeah.
So open loops, that's one reason why.
What are some why you rarely see someone that's thriving in a sales role, in a new business acquisition sales role? Rarely, very rarely. I don't know any example actually myself of someone transitioning into customer success and enjoying that basically.
No, the only, you see movement from sales to customer success, and like you said, there may be an example of this, but I have never seen anyone who was successful in sales.
But on the other hand, like people been in sales and more prefer this ongoing relationship with the same customer and the same building relationships and working like more on this long term, they are usually not so successful and not so much thriving in acquisition, new business sales, and they
Correct.
transition into customer success and they
They
thrive
do
there
great
instead.
because right person in the right role. So that's a really big deal. And I want to, being deliberate with, as a CSM, being deliberate with where you work, the types of customers you work for. If you say, I just want to be in customer success and you don't really care what kind of company it is, I'm going to stop you right there. You're
Yeah.
telling me you would be okay working in either a startup or a large established enterprise company? If you say yes, I'm going to ask you to really to think about that, because one of those is probably going to be a good fit, but probably not both. If you love structure and following rules that are already written, processes already in place,
Yeah.
and you go work in a startup where you're going to be designing things, you're going to be figuring out stuff on your own, like, you're probably going to be miserable, and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
If you love coming up with the way to do things and you go work in a company where things are already decided, you're not going to thrive. You're not just not going to thrive. You're probably going to be miserable. It's probably not going to work. So you need to be deliberate. And on the flip side, as a head of customer success, you need to be deliberate about the experience and the characteristics of the people that you think would be a good fit for the roles that you have opened and created on your team. And don't just bring people in because you need people. It's not good for you. You're going to have turnover, and it's not good for the people that you're bringing in. When I work with companies, I don't recruit, I don't find people, but a lot of times I'm asked to help vet potential candidates. And I always take the role of, because I don't work for the company, I always ask the candidate, why should you not work here? I want to explore that. And so I will tell them very specifically, this is what the role actually entails. This is what it's going to be like. This is what your day-to-day is going to be like. Now tell me why you don't think that'll work. And you say, gosh, Lincoln being negative, what a shocker. But, but no, it's not a negative exercise at all. What I want to explore is, are there legitimate reasons why this won't work? Because we're going to save the candidate the time and the trouble of accepting a role and then being put into a situation of failure. And we are going to also save the company time and money of bringing somebody in that doesn't work out. So I've done that multiple times. And a couple of times I've had a candidate go, wow, you know what? I hadn't thought of that. No, this sounds awful for me.
Yeah.
This sounds like a role that I would be miserable in. And they're like, thank you for that. And it was a positive thing all around. But we have to think about that. Again, we have to be deliberate with all of this. But getting back to the why, I derailed us for a little bit.
Yeah, those are great points. I think other things that make like reasons or root causes for why customer success managers become burned out is, I think also, we talked about this several times before, but it's like this, in general, there's an overload of customers, also in some case, or most cases, also overload on the calendar. I think that's, again, back to this. If you're this person that really cares and wants to do a good job with all your customers, and you have basically an overload where you don't have the capacity to do proper customer success management of these customers, then you will, of course, you won't be able to do it.
So overloaded of customers, that's capacity planning, where we really need to understand the number of person hours required at each life cycle stage to ensure that our customers are getting their appropriate experience. But part of that appropriate experience is going to be a particular cadence of meetings. And we need to be thoughtful about what meetings are actually required. And very often we're having too many meetings, are too long, and we can do a lot to eliminate meetings and make the ones that we have shorter. And if we can't make them too much shorter, we can make them more efficient by offloading to async channels. And it's funny, a lot of times what we talk about breaks down to just talking about meetings. But I think we mentioned this maybe even in our last podcast episode. The reason we talk about meetings so much is because they're the most expensive thing we do with our customers. This is where if I'm spending one-on-one time with my customer, there's an associated cost with that. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be investing the expense of having that meeting with our customer, but I do think we need to take a look at that and make sure that the meetings we are having are, one, necessary, and two, as effective and efficient as possible. And none of that is to say that there's ever an excuse for a calendar full of back-to-back meetings. A CSM should always have a little bit of time between meetings, or at least maybe a couple of meetings back-to-back or something like that. But there should be time to be a human. There should be a time to just take a breather. And of course, we also need to prepare and follow up from meetings. We need time for that as well. Meetings are a really big deal. They're expensive, and they are a cause of burnout if we're overloading. And honestly, if you're a head of customer success and you have a full calendar as a measure of success of your CSMs, you should probably rethink that. Your value metric is probably not right.
Right. I think that's a huge point here on the why as well. And also another one, we talked about expectations about signing up for the job as a customer success manager, what it entails, but also another side of expectations is also what is promised from the customer success manager from the customer side. So also manage expectations in that sense. And we know that sometimes things have been promised or things have been said in the sales, or whether it's wherever it comes from, it can sometimes be assumed as well by the customer what they should get and so on in terms of service and help and so on. So that could also lead to burnout.
Absolutely. And I think that sort of keeps going into the next point, which would be bad fit customers, right?
Oh, yeah.
So customers that are a good fit, that have success potential, but have been oversold or their expectations somehow mismanaged, that's a problem. But we also have customers that don't have success potential, that sales, for all the good that they do, sometimes bring in customers that don't have success potential. And now I, as the CSM, am tasked with trying to make this customer successful when they do not have success potential. No matter what I do, they're not going to be successful, but it's going to count against me because they're in my book of business now. That's a problem. If I'm dealing with a broken product. So I, as the CSM, am supposed to act as the duct tape to keep our broken product together, which happens far too often. All of these things are what we call upstream problems. If sales does a better job at vetting customers, not over promising, and product does their job at building a product that's actually usable, I, as the CSM, don't have to deal with those things. Now I can just focus on making the customer successful.
Right.
So those upstream issues can be a big deal for the CSM as well.
Definitely. Another one is the imposter syndrome, basically, where you got the job, but you basically don't believe you have the skills, the know-how, the competence, basically, the confidence to do the job.
Yeah. I saw a meme that said, like, the person asked for a high salary. Yeah. And the hiring manager said, "You're asking for a lot of money for someone that doesn't know what they're doing." And they said, "Yeah, it's going to be really hard since I don't know what I'm doing."
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah. No, but I think that's also a case that can be quite common and create stress and burnout potentially as well.
So, yeah, on imposter syndrome, I think there's two things. One, objective confidence, which is a framework we teach in Impact Academy, but essentially we just objectively look at our qualifications and everything, and we don't have to talk ourselves into being confident. We can just literally look at the reasons we're here, and that can help offset some of the imposter syndrome. If you truly are in a situation where you don't know what you're doing, that can be an issue, and it can be an issue that you don't want to bring up with your boss because, well, you would be admitting that you don't know what you're doing. The flip side of that, though, is they hired you. Why would they hire you? No, like, they probably knew that you didn't know what you were doing. So I think sometimes we try to hide from the truth when everybody knows the truth. And it's probably better to just say, "Hey, I don't know how to do this thing. I thought I did," or what I thought this was different. I need to know how to do this. And again, like I said, probably everyone knows that you don't know how to do it. Someone's just waiting for the other person to either offer help or speak up and say you need help. And then if you don't, later on, you're going to be on a performance improvement plan. You won't hit that, and then you'll be fired. If you just speak up, you'll probably get the help that you need. If you really don't know what you're doing. But imposter syndrome usually is, I actually do know what I'm doing. I'm just not feeling super confident right now. And so it's an imposter syndrome. It's not you're actually an imposter. It's a feeling of
Makes a big difference. Yeah.
Exactly. This is assuming you actually know what you're doing. So objective confidence is a framework that can really help you there. And that's something that your head of customer success should take note of. So when they're seeing these things that are indicating that you are burned out, and they notice that you are exhibiting imposter syndrome symptoms, then they should intervene and coach you on objective confidence, get you back on track, and help you get out of your own way. That's the responsibility of a head of customer success or a director or somebody that's in charge of your team or whatever.
Definitely. And I think another part of it, and sometimes what can happen here, of course, is that this can turn into a negative cycle as well, or a spiral where you have some parts are upstream problems like bad fit customers and a broken product. You have too many customers. Maybe you also lack a few skills or you're new to the job. So all these things work in a negative spiral where you feel that you can't do all the things you want to do, and you lose track of things, and it spirals down. I think that's the worst kind of scenario, and also one of the things that maybe lead to burnout.
Absolutely. I think one last thing on this is a lack of tools, a lack of systems. Very often we see burnout caused by not a lack of data, maybe a lot of data that we just don't have a good grasp on it, or we don't have the ability to sift through it. And so we don't know what's going on with our customers, and that lack of visibility and seemingly that lack of control, then that can lead to that's one thing that can also lead to burnout. That can just add a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety to your role, which that can then lead to those more significant psychological burnout symptoms. So making sure that you have something like Start Deliver in place to be able to manage what's going on with your customers, I think is really important. I want to talk about real quick before we give some concrete ways to deal with this. You were mentioning there's 3 things that people need to feel motivated. And I think motivation is a big part of this as well.
Yeah.
There's 3 things that people need to feel motivated. What are those?
No, but these are more or less universal, and they've been a lot of studies and a lot of data on this. That there's basically 3 things. Look at high-performing individuals and high-performing teams even more. There are these 3 things that all have in common, and it's mastery, basically mastering your craft, being really, truly good in your job and knowing that. But that's number 1, mastery. Number 2 here is feeling valued, appreciated as part of a team. The human connection part here is really important. And the third one is autonomy. Basically, I run the show. I run my own show here. I can do well by myself. So if you have these 3, those are like the recipe for really high performing customer success management.
So if you look at those 3 things, mastery, feeling valued and appreciated, and autonomy, and you go back and you look at the reasons why people feel burned out, you look at the signs of burnout, you start to see that it's very likely that these 3 things are not just not there, but something has actively eroded these things. Everything, autonomy, certainly the feeling appreciated, and just the mastery all go away. So all those things are related. So if you just focus on ensuring your team has what they need to feel like they know what they're doing. So sign them up for our Impact Academy courses so that they have that mastery of their craft. Make sure that you are understanding that you have humans working for you, and humans need to feel appreciated, legitimately appreciated, and not just a pizza party every once in a while. Although people have been hating on pizza parties. I'm just saying that's not enough. Don't only do that.
But especially if you have a distributed team, right? If you're working remote a lot, or I think this is one of the parts that
it's so hard
in the busy times, and it's easy to forget about this, and especially when you have a remote team, to not skip these things that are key. And this is, of course, more up to a leader. If you're an individual in a team, you can do part of this, of course, be part of it, but you, as a leader, this is really on you to facilitate.
I will just say this about the remote work. There is such thing as pizza delivery. You can have a distributed pizza party.
Yes.
But the bottom line is, it is. But look, the humans that you work for have to feel legitimately appreciated. And if they have to step up and do more than what they signed up for, just make sure you're rewarding them in legitimately meaningful ways. And let me just spell that out for you. Money. That's why people have jobs. That's why people work. We can say all sorts of other reasons, but like at the end of the day, if you give people a little bit extra money because they stepped up, that's probably going to be good. Now, again, that's for those temporary times where, you have to step up in the busy time. Yeah. If that's just the normal way, that even then at some point, that money's not going to be enough to overcome everything else, unless it's a lot of money. But even then, at some point, it's diminishing returns. So keep those three things in mind: mastery, feeling appreciated, and autonomy, and send your team to Impact Academy. And I think everything will be great. Yes. Hey, as we do, let's wrap this up with three very practical things.
Yeah. I'll start off. So the number one here, you need to pay attention to these signals we mentioned earlier. And you do that both if you're customer success manager, to yourself, of course, but even more so if you have a team as head of customer success, and understand the why behind these potential burnouts.
Yeah, and I'm going to pitch Impact Academy again, but however you do it, just make sure that your team has the training necessary to feel confident in their role.
Definitely, big one. And last, create, or if you need to, find an environment for you as a CSM and your team of CSMs to really thrive, and be deliberate about the people that you bring into the team so they can really thrive as an individual. So those are three things. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week. Hey, thanks for listening. Do you want to bring your customer success to the next level? Check out Impact Academy. We have training programs for customer success managers and for leaders in customer success.